Hello everyone and welcome.
How can a club that has multiplied social plans in recent months, job cuts, and whose owner publicly stated that if these measures had not been taken, the team would have lacked liquidity at the end of the season? So this same club, how this summer, a few months after these statements, can basically already throw around 230 million euros on the transfer market?
The worst part, without having sold a single player for the moment, obviously, you recognize Manchester United because it raises questions. Because the austerity measures were publicly admitted by the owner.
In fact, he justified his choices, particularly regarding the employees. Besides, 25% of the staff has already been laid off. So maybe there were too many employees. Okay, there's no issue at that level.
But we also made penny-pinching savings. Remember, there were meals in the canteen, Christmas bonuses, we removed some boxes. Really, we tried to save every cent in certain areas of the club.
And this summer, after the statements, no, United will no longer overpay, etc. Because unfortunately, we knew it was somewhat the legacy of the Glazers and Ed Woodward. That is to say, United tended to overpay for transfers, salaries and commissions. So the management, which is full of competent people, I must say, tells you this. And now you're going to spend roughly 85, 90 on Šeško. You triggered Cunha's clause, so about 75 million, if I'm not mistaken. You didn't negotiate, you paid the clause. And Mbumo with the bonuses and everything, you're at least at 80. So you spent 225, 230 million without counting agent commissions, a few months after saying that basically, if you continued like that, you would go bankrupt. So we will question whether United is committing economic suicide or if behind it, they had the possibility to pursue this investment policy. We will stay very factual in this video and remind that United has lost, I believe, more than 320, 350 million over the last 3 years. It's absolutely colossal. Last year they had losses, I believe it's more than 120 or 130 million. So the club is not doing very well economically. That, I mean, is factual, with the social plans, active statements and all. So that's why today, no, but United is doing poorly. No, United is doing poorly. And why is United doing poorly? It's not Ineos's fault. I want to remind you of the original sin. I will always remind you of it. United was put into debt by the Glazers, who drained the club like it was not possible. I remind you that it is because of the Glazers and the buyout at Burnley that today in England, you can no longer buy clubs under a leveraged buyout. It's because of them. And so United still has to pay the interest, which means that last year there were more than 100 million in losses again. This is particularly due to the interest and also certain things related to an initial purchase by Ratcliffe and the Ineos group, which bought 27% of the Glazers shares, and I want to remind you, must buy another portion of the shares, knowing that he has obtained this sporting control that belongs to Ineos, even if Ratcliffe is not yet the majority owner of Manchester United. I also want to remind you, to be very factual, that Ratcliffe's fortune has significantly decreased according to specialized magazines in England. So don't worry about Stefan Mount, he's still more than a billionaire, but he no longer has the financial capacity he once had. That his group, particularly in petrochemicals, has financial issues, and that Ineos has not been able to fulfill certain sponsorship commitments, notably with the All Blacks, and I believe also with something related to skiing, and that there are even legal proceedings initiated against Ineos for non-payment and other matters. So really, things are not going very well, and the tap in Nice has been turned off to focus on United. So that's the case, there's no problem. And now this summer arrives, and there we have an investment policy. It's absolutely out of this world, because at the very beginning, internally, I can tell you, they had said, we will try to balance. That is to say, United is still a cash machine. But basically, we say to ourselves, because before, it was the problem with the Glazers, the players would bury themselves and were unsellable. However, last year with the new management, we had the first sales. We thought, that's good. And then we said to ourselves, okay, United is doing it like this. We will buy to strengthen the team as Amori wants. And on the other side, we will separate some people from the high salaries and others to more or less balance things. That is to say, a bit like Chelsea, like everything. We will say, okay, we buy, but we will sell a minimum so that it's not like we buy 250 million and sell nothing. Except that, I want to remind you again, the balance in transfers economically is not as we think, okay? We buy a player for 80 million, you don't give the 80 million right away. In fact, United is going to focus on that, especially on its purchasing policy. So, I'm going to briefly remind you of the basics of accounting entries in football, because that's exactly how United will do it. Let's say you pay 80 million, let's say Mbemo, with bonuses, 80 million, let's simplify. I think you must have signed for 5 years, something like that. So basically, it will be 80 on your balance sheet divided by 5. That means it's the amortization. I'm speaking generally, not about the salary and all that. But basically, you do 80 divided by 5. Do you get the idea? Because instead of having minus 80 on your balance sheet, no, each year you will divide this amount by 5, by the number of contract years. So off the top of my head, I think that's about 16 and a half, if I'm not mistaken. So each year, basically, we'll round it, we'll put a bit more. Let's say you have 17. Well, that doesn't take into account the salary and all. However, if you ever sell a player, let's say for 80 million, on your balance sheet, you add 80. Okay, do you understand the difference? That's why there are so many famous player trades. It's mainly for accounting entries, even if you don't have the money currently in the cash register. In fact, you have to differentiate the cash flow of the accounting entry. And so United signs players for 80, 100 million, but each time it's no longer about the contract. So actually, there you go. Each time, let's say 20 million, 15 million. Basically, each year on the financial statement, that's what's reduced. So you get the idea a little bit. Knowing that for the amount paid, the 80, let's say, United managed to pay the bulk of the amount after the third and fourth year. And obviously, already last year, which means that this year, they will give very little money. That's what they said with Wolverhampton for Kuna and with Brentford for Mbemo. So actually this summer, they are not going to spend a lot. However, United has the Trafford in cash flow. This means that each match brings in several million through ticket sales, merchandising, etc., plus the other contracts. So basically, the management's idea is to say, okay, we are going all in because indeed it is very risky. That is to say, we're doing a bit like Barca under Bartomeu at the time, except that United's situation was better economically than Barca's. That is to say, we're going to strengthen the team fully to get back to the Champions League. Because I want to remind you that the defeat against Tottenham cost about 120 million euros. Minimum. United, I'm talking 150. Because the qualification with the champions, with all the international TV rights revenues and also merchandising and ticket sales, brings you at least 120, 150 million more. It's colossal. Plus the contracts that increase. We know that Adidas gives 10 million less, I believe, if there is no Champions League qualification, etc. On the other hand, I tend to think that if there was a Champions League qualification, it would have also slightly increased the payroll. But well, overall you earn at least more than 100 million, 120 million. So you don't have that money. We remember that this defeat in the Europa League final hurt the account a lot. So to get back to the Champions League, your full contracts and everything, because United, it keeps going, the brand keeps going, but the sponsors pay less and less because there's not enough qualification, there's less visibility. Especially since this year, the Red Devils have no European Cup. So the idea is to say, we're going to strengthen a lot now, and basically, so we're going to pay very little this summer, we'll save a bit on the side, I'll explain later. And basically, we will requalify for the European Cup Champions League, so we will have revenues that will increase by 100, 150 million, or even 200 million. Which means that those years, we will be in the positive, and most of the transfers we made for this summer, 2025 will be paid in 2027 and 2028. However, for them, we return to the Champions League, so we regain our income, so there will be no problem paying for 2027 and 2028. Do you understand the idea a little bit? At the same time, there is still the idea of selling players because they have to. I mean, especially for the wage bill, which they managed to reduce. That was a very good point for Manchester United, unlike Barca Bartomeu, for example. The wage bill was not so huge compared to the revenue, and they always had cash. So there, they said, okay, Rashford. It's true, Rashford has a huge salary burden, etc. There is also Chelsea, which did not activate the option on Sancho's loan, so they had to give 7 million to United. Except, okay, you save about 20 million. We agree that it is still largely insufficient. They obviously want to sell Garnacho, Anthony, and many others. Garnacho, we already talked about, the case is very poorly managed because you ostracize the player. Whether he was problematic or not is not the question. Is that now you need money, you need business. By doing this, you lower the player's value, especially since at the start of the transfer window, you asked for sums that were impossible for several players. Now you're letting everyone know. We want to get rid of Højlund. It's the same, it's an industrial accident. 85, 90 million for the arrival. There, you say. At 30, 35, we let him go, because the player doesn't want to leave. Obviously, you have these, let's say, industrial crashes, it's terrible. Nevertheless, you need to bring in cash and you don't want to part with your best players. Problem is, it's already the first week of August. You haven't sold anything. You haven't sold anything, and the value of your players, the longer you wait, the more United is in a position of weakness. Because there, you recruit, okay, but you will also have to part with players given the number of players in the squad. You have one match per week this year, you don't have European Cup. Okay, you have the Carling Cup and the FA Cup, but you can have so many players, especially offensively. So for Amorim, it won't be easy either, so you have to part with them. The problem is, did you use the right methods for that? And at the same time, everyone sees that you paid full price. You overpaid all the players. Salaries, agent commission. I will give an example about MBMO. MBMO, I say, great is Jonathan Kebe, great is his company, mandate at Brentford, mandate at United, and player representation. Oh, ham cheese, main course, starter, dessert. Great it is, and the greatest of all is that United said yes to everything. So, these are the choices. We want to be strengthened offensively. Some might say maybe the goalkeeper or the defense. It's the staff's choices. Economically, they justify themselves like that, but they still need to sell a bit at the end of this market. They even need it more than that. But actually, it raises many other questions. It's still the whole paradox of football. Justifying on one side social plans, job cuts maybe, be careful, maybe there were too many jobs, etc. To save money on meals, so let's say on something where employees sometimes earn 2,000 or 3,000 euros per month, which all has to be managed. And on the other side, giving millions to agents, giving to players, whether you need them or not, because you already have many offensive players, sometimes giving 800,000 per month to a guy. To justify it if you're an employee of United, it's a bit much, really. And on the other side, you have Ratcliffe. No, we're going to be bankrupt soon. Because he had exaggerated deliberately to also absolve himself of certain responsibilities and justify his choices. And at the same time, he was making people dream. No, but look, we might build a new stadium, etc. But John, first, you'll have to buy the other shares from the Glazers. Already, it will be necessary to properly allocate the funds because it's not easy. I remind you that the Glazers have been slicing up the club for a very long time. And it's dramatic for one of the biggest brands, especially one of the greatest teams in the history of the beautiful game, nonetheless.
And a final thought on this subject, and this reminds me of Barca, is that there is more and more communication around the club. No, but it's fine, they can. It sounds like the GNCG appearances of Gerard Lopez or John Textor. No, but it's fine, there are 7 million that Chelsea, Rashford's salary.
You can still feel that when you overuse communication using influencers decided there. The clubs that often do this, it's when they're trying to justify themselves and it rarely smells good. United before didn't have that.
Now, there's that. While Paris is doing well, we obviously hope for the Red Devils because it's very risky, the club is not going to go bankrupt, etc.
But the question will arise. Next year, what do you do if you haven't had the Champions League? Anyway, I hope this helps you see things a little more clearly. And the file to follow closely, knowing that we might soon talk about the finances of other Premier League clubs because there will still be plenty to say, whether it's about Liverpool,
Aston Villa too, where there are things that are not very clear, and maybe others, but that will be soon.
And with that, keep the faith.